The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly over the endless stretch of asphalt that connected Phoenix to El Paso, painting the desert landscape in shades of amber and gold. For Jack Morrison, this route had become as familiar as the lines on his weathered hands. 32 years of trucking had carved every turn, every mile marker, every roadside diner into his memory. But today felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. The 18-wheeler's engine hummed its usual mechanical prayer as Jack adjusted his position in the worn leather seat. The cabin smelled of diesel fuel, old coffee, and something else. The lingering scent of loneliness that had become his constant companion over the years. His cargo of bottled beverages shifted slightly with each turn, creating a rhythmic percussion that normally lulled him into the meditative state all long-haul drivers knew well. At 55, Jack had grown comfortable with solitude. His graying beard framed a face that had seen too much road and not enough home, and his blue eyes held the distant look of a man who had learned to keep his thoughts locked away. The CB radio crackled occasionally with the voices of other drivers, but Jack rarely participated in their conversations anymore. He preferred the silence, or so he told himself. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides of the highway, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional cactus standing sentinel against the harsh landscape. Heat waves danced above the asphalt, creating mirages that appeared and disappeared like memories he tried to forget. Jack reached for his thermos of coffee, now lukewarm and bitter, but it was better than nothing on a day when the thermometer promised to climb well above 100 degrees. His thoughts wandered, as they often did on these long stretches, to the life he'd left behind in different cities, different states. There had been a time when he dreamed of something more than an endless cycle of loading docks and truck stops, when he'd imagined settling down somewhere green and quiet. But those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else now, someone younger and more foolish. The miles clicked by on his odometer, 50, 60, 70 miles from Phoenix. Jack was making good time, better than usual. Maybe he'd reach El Paso early enough to grab a decent meal instead of gas station sandwiches. Maybe he'd even call his dispatcher and see about taking an extra day off. The thought surprised him. When had he last taken time for himself? Then he saw her. At first, she was just a speck on the horizon, a dark smudge against the pale concrete of the roadside. Jack squinted through his sunglasses, thinking it might be debris or perhaps a broken-down vehicle. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made his heart skip. A young woman, standing alone beside the highway with no car in sight. She wasn't hitchhiking. Her arm wasn't extended. Her thumb wasn't raised to catch a ride. She simply stood there, motionless as a statue. Her long dark hair whipping around her face in the hot desert wind. Her sundress clung to her slight frame, and even from a distance, Jack could see she was barefoot on the scorching pavement. Every instinct told him to keep driving. In 32 years on the road, he'd learned to be cautious about strangers, especially in the middle of nowhere. Too many drivers had stories about stops that went wrong, about good intentions that led to trouble. But something about this young woman, maybe 20, 21 at most, held him transfixed. She wasn't looking for help. That was what struck him most. She wasn't waving, wasn't trying to get his attention. She was simply existing in that moment, holding something small clutched to her chest, staring out at the endless desert as if waiting for it to provide answers to questions she couldn't voice. Jack felt his foot ease off the accelerator, almost without conscious thought. The truck began to slow, its engine noise dropping to a lower register. He pulled into the right lane, then onto the shoulder. Gravel crunching under the massive tires as he came to a stop about 30 feet ahead of where she stood. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jack sat in his cab, air conditioning humming, watching her in his side mirror. She remained perfectly still, as if his presence hadn't registered at all. He found himself studying her face in the mirror. Young, with the kind of beauty that hadn't yet been touched by the harder edges of life, but carrying an expression of profound sadness that seemed far too old for her years. The rational part of his mind urged him to shift back into drive and continue on his route. He had a schedule to keep, a delivery to make. This wasn't his problem, wasn't his responsibility, but something deeper, something he'd buried under years of careful emotional distance, wouldn't let him leave. Jack turned off the engine and climbed down from the cab. Immediately hit by the full force of the desert heat, it rose from the pavement in waves, making the air shimmer and dance. He walked slowly toward the young woman, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder, giving her plenty of space and time to react to his approach. "Miss!" he called out when he was still several feet away. "You okay out here?" She turned toward him then, and Jack felt his breath catch. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray-green and filled with a pain so raw it was almost physical. In her hands, she clutched what he now recognized as a pregnancy test, the small plastic device looking impossibly significant in her small fingers. "I'm fine," she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. There was no fear in her tone, no wariness, just a bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of someone who had reached the end of their rope and found it fraying in their hands. Jack nodded slowly, not wanting to spook her, but unable to simply walk away. "It's mighty hot out here. You got water? Somewhere to go?" A ghost of a smile flickered across her features. "Not anymore," she said. And in those two words, Jack heard a story he recognized: abandonment, disappointment, the kind of betrayal that left scars on the soul. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust and something indefinable, the smell of dreams deferred and hopes abandoned. Jack looked at this young woman, standing alone in the vastness of the American Southwest, and saw something of himself reflected back. "Well," he said carefully, "I'm heading east, El Paso first, then who knows where after that. I've got water, food, air conditioning." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I've got room for a passenger, if you need to get somewhere." She studied his face for a long moment, and Jack had the strange sensation of being evaluated not just for safety, but for something deeper. Trustworthiness, perhaps, or the capacity for kindness. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded once, a small but decisive movement. "My name's Emily," she said, taking a step toward the truck. "Jack," he replied, leading the way back to the cab. "Jack Morrison." As he helped her up into the passenger seat, Jack noticed she moved carefully, protectively, one hand always cradling her still flat stomach. The pregnancy test disappeared into a small bag she carried, but its presence seemed to fill the entire cab with unspoken questions and uncertain futures. Jack started the engine and eased back onto the highway, glancing at his unexpected passenger. Emily sat quietly, looking out at the desert landscape. Her hands folded in her lap. There was something about her stillness, her composure in the face of what was clearly a crisis, that reminded him of someone he'd rather not think about. But as the miles began to roll by and the truck found its rhythm again on the open road, Jack found himself hoping that whatever lay ahead for both of them, this chance encounter might offer something neither had expected to find. Redemption, perhaps, or simply the reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, the road provided exactly what you needed, even when you didn't know you were looking for it. Chapter 2, Secrets on the Highway. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The first hour passed in relative silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of the engine and the occasional crackle of the CB radio. Emily sat pressed against the passenger door, her eyes fixed on the endless expanse of desert that stretched beyond the window. Jack found himself stealing glances at her, noting the way she held herself, protective yet resigned, like someone who had learned not to expect too much from the world. The truck's air conditioning battled valiantly against the desert heat, creating a pocket of artificial comfort that felt almost surreal against the harsh landscape outside. Jack reached over and turned down the radio, which had been playing an old country song about lost love and second chances. "You hungry?" he asked, breaking the silence. "I've got some sandwiches in the cooler back there, some fruit. Nothing fancy, but it's food." Emily turned to look at him, and he caught something vulnerable in her expression before she composed herself. "I don't want to take your food," she said quietly. "I've got plenty," Jack assured her, reaching behind his seat to pull out a small cooler. "Besides, you're eating for two now, right?" The words hung in the air between them, acknowledging what they both knew but hadn't directly addressed. Emily's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, a gesture so small and natural that it made Jack's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. She accepted a sandwich, turkey and cheese on white bread, and ate it slowly, methodically, as if she hadn't realized how hungry she was until food was placed in front of her. Jack handed her a bottle of water, watching as she drank deeply. "Thank you," she said, and there was something in her voice that suggested she wasn't just talking about the food. "Don't mention it," Jack replied, his own voice gruffer than he intended. He cleared his throat and adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. "So, Emily, you got family somewhere? People who might be worried about you?" Her laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. "Not anymore," she said, echoing her earlier words. "My grandmother, she passed away about 2 months ago. She was the only one who—" Emily trailed off, shaking her head. "The only one who understood." Jack felt a familiar ache in his chest, the one that came whenever he was reminded of connections lost, bridges burned. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Because sometimes there weren't any other words. She raised me, mostly," Emily continued, her voice growing softer. "My parents, they weren't really the parenting type, too busy with their own problems to worry about mine. But Grandma Rose, she was different. She used to say that everyone deserves a second chance, that no mistake is too big to overcome." "Sounds like a wise woman," Jack said, and he meant it. She was. Emily's fingers traced the condensation on her water bottle. She would have been so excited about the baby. She always wanted great-grandchildren. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Jack wanted to ask about the father, about what had happened to leave her stranded on a desert highway with nothing but a pregnancy test and the clothes on her back. But he'd learned over the years that some stories came out in their own time, and pushing usually only caused people to retreat further into themselves. Instead, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small, worn book. "This might sound strange," he said, holding it out to her, "but would you mind reading something? My eyes aren't what they used to be, and the print's pretty small." Emily took the book, a collection of prayers and inspirational readings that looked like it had been well loved over many years. The cover was faded, the edges worn soft from handling. "This is beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the embossed lettering. "It looks old. It was my—" Jack paused, catching himself before he revealed too much. "It belonged to someone important to me, a long time ago." Emily opened the book carefully, as if handling something precious. "What would you like me to read?" "Anything," Jack said. "Just something peaceful. Something hopeful." As Emily's voice filled the cab, reading a passage about finding strength in difficult times, Jack felt something inside him begin to unwind. Her voice was clear and gentle, with just a hint of the South in it. Georgia, maybe, or the Carolinas. It reminded him of summer evenings and front porch swings, of a life he'd once thought he might have. The landscape began to change as they drove deeper into New Mexico. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills, dotted with oil pumps that looked like giant metal birds pecking at the earth. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jack? Emily's voice interrupted his thoughts. Yeah. Why did you stop for me? Really? The question caught him off guard, though he supposed he should have expected it. He considered his answer carefully, wanting to be honest without revealing too much about the ghosts that haunted his own past. I guess, he began, then stopped, started again. I've been driving these roads for more than 30 years. I've seen a lot of people in tough spots, and I've learned that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stop, one person willing to help. But you could have kept driving, Emily pressed gently. Most people would have. Jack was quiet for a long moment, watching the road ahead. Yeah, he said finally. I could have, and there was a time when I would have. But I guess I've learned that the road has a way of putting people in your path for a reason. Maybe you needed a ride, or maybe... He glanced at her briefly. Maybe I needed to remember what it feels like to do something right. Emily studied his profile, noting the way his jaw tightened when he talked about the past. The way his knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel. What happened? She asked softly. What made you think you needed to remember? For a moment, Jack considered deflecting, changing the subject, maintaining the careful distance he'd cultivated over the years. But something about Emily, her youth, her vulnerability, her obvious need for human connection, made him want to be honest. I made some mistakes, he said quietly. Big ones. The kind that hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt. The kind that follow you around long after you think you've outrun them. We all make mistakes, Emily said, unconsciously echoing her grandmother's wisdom. Some of us make bigger ones than others, Jack replied, his voice heavy with old regret. They fell into silence again, but it was different now, less uncomfortable, more companionable. The truck ate up the miles, carrying them both toward an uncertain future. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, tiny pinpricks of light in the vast emptiness above. As they approached a truck stop, its neon signs promising food, fuel, and rest, Jack felt Emily tense beside him. He realized she was probably wondering where she would sleep tonight, what would happen when their temporary sanctuary of the cab came to an end. We'll stop here for the night, he said, making the decision without really thinking about it. Get some real food, some rest. Tomorrow we can figure out the next step. Emily turned to look at him, surprise and gratitude warring in her expression. Jack, I can't ask you to... You're not asking, he said firmly. I'm offering. And before you start worrying about it, the company pays for my hotel rooms. I've got a double. You can have your own bed, your own space. As they pulled into the truck stop, the lights washing over the cab in neon blues and reds, Jack caught Emily wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. It was a small gesture, quickly hidden, but it reminded him once again of someone else who had once needed his help. Someone he had failed when it mattered most. This time, he told himself, would be different. This time, he wouldn't walk away. Chapter 3. Echoes from the Past. The Desert Rose Truck Stop lived up to its name, with plastic roses adorning every table in the diner and faded photographs of desert sunsets lining the walls. The smell of fried food and strong coffee filled the air, mixing with the diesel fumes that seemed to permeate everything in places like this. Jack led Emily to a corner booth, away from the handful of other truckers scattered throughout the restaurant. Emily slid into the vinyl seat, her eyes taking in the familiar truck stop atmosphere, the kind of place she'd seen in movies but never actually experienced. Everything felt surreal, from the flickering neon sign outside to the waitress with bright red lipstick who approached their table with practiced efficiency. "What can I get you folks?" the waitress asked, her name tag reading Dolores. She was probably in her 50s, with kind eyes that had seen plenty of travelers come and go. Jack ordered a burger and fries, while Emily chose a bowl of soup and some bread. As Dolores walked away, Emily noticed how the other patrons glanced at them curiously. She wondered what they saw. A father and daughter. An unlikely pair thrown together by circumstance? "You ever been in a place like this before?" Jack asked, following her gaze around the diner. Emily shook her head. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about truck stops and diners, though. She traveled a lot when she was younger, before she settled down to raise me. She said you could meet the most interesting people in places like this." "She was right about that," Jack said, a small smile playing at his lips. "I've had some of the best conversations of my life in truck stop diners. People are more honest when they're passing through, I think. Less worried about what others might think." Their food arrived quickly, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Emily found herself studying Jack when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something about him that reminded her of her grandmother's stories about the good men in the world. The ones who helped without expecting anything in return, who carried other people's burdens as if they were their own. "Jack," she said suddenly, setting down her spoon, "can I ask you something personal?" He looked up from his burger, his expression guarded but not unfriendly. "Shoot! Do you have any children?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Jack's hand tightened around his coffee mug, and Emily watched as a range of emotions crossed his face. Pain, regret, something that looked like longing. He began, then stopped. Tried again. "It's complicated." Emily waited, sensing that pushing would only make him retreat. She'd learned from her grandmother that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the spaces between words. Finally, Jack spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had a daughter once. Or rather, I should have had a daughter." "Should have?" Jack stared down at his hands, weathered and scarred from years of handling cargo and wrestling with stubborn machinery. "Her mother and we were young. Too young, probably. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked, did what I thought was the sensible thing at the time." Emily felt her stomach drop, though she wasn't sure why. "What did you do?" "I left," Jack said simply, the words carrying the weight of decades of regret. "Packed up my things one night and disappeared. Told myself she was better off without me, that I wasn't ready to be a father, that I'd only mess everything up." The diner seemed to grow quieter around them, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Emily stared at Jack, seeing him in an entirely new light. The protector who had stopped for her on the highway was also someone who had abandoned a pregnant woman, someone not unlike herself. "Did you ever?" she began, then stopped, not sure she wanted to know the answer. "Ever try to find them? Ever try to make it right?" Jack's laugh was bitter. "By the time I worked up the courage, it was too late. I tracked down Sarah, that was her name, about 10 years later. Found out she'd had the baby, a little girl named Emma." Emily's breath caught. Emma, so close to her own name that it felt like a cruel joke. "Sarah had gotten married to a good man," Jack continued, lost in his memories. "Emma had a father who was actually there for her, who took her to school and helped with homework and all the things I should have done. I watched them from across the street one day, this perfect little family. Emma was about 9 then, laughing and playing in their front yard. And I realized that approaching them would only disrupt their happiness for my own selfish need to assuage my guilt." Emily reached across the table and touched his hand. "Jack, the worst part," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "is that I kept telling myself I was being noble, that staying away was the right thing to do. But the truth is, I was still running, still taking the coward's way out." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Jack's confession settling between them. Emily understood now why he had stopped for her, why he seemed to see something in her situation that resonated so deeply. She also understood the book of prayers in his glove compartment, the careful way he'd asked her to read from it. "The book," she said suddenly. It was hers, wasn't it? Sarah's? Jack nodded slowly. She gave it to me early in our relationship, said everyone needed something to hold on to when times got tough. I kept it all these years, told myself it was just... I don't know what I told myself. Maybe you kept it because you knew someday you'd need to remember who you used to be, Emily suggested gently. Before you let fear make your decisions for you. Jack looked at her with surprise. For someone so young, she had an wisdom that seemed to come from experience rather than years. How did you get so smart? My grandmother, Emily said with a sad smile. She used to say that pain either makes you bitter or it makes you wise. The choice is yours. As if summoned by their emotional conversation, Dolores appeared at their table with the coffee pot. You folks doing all right? You both look like you could use another cup. That'd be great, thanks, Jack said. Grateful for the interruption. As Dolores refilled their cups, she studied Emily with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen her share of people in trouble. Honey, you look familiar. You've been through here before. Emily shook her head. No, Mom. First time. Huh? Dolores frowned slightly. Could have sworn, well, never mind. My memory ain't what it used to be. She started to walk away, then turned back. You know, if you folks need anything, and I mean anything, you just holler. We look after each other around here. After she left, Emily turned back to Jack. People are kind here. Most truckers are good people, Jack agreed. We look out for each other on the road. Have to really. It can be a lonely life. Is that why you do it? Because you prefer being alone? Jack considered the question carefully. I used to think so. Told myself I was independent. That I didn't need anyone. But lately... He paused, looking directly at her. Lately, I've been wondering if I've just been hiding. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. Jack, what you did, leaving Sarah and Emma, it was wrong. But that doesn't mean you can't still do something right. Like what? Like not running away this time, Emily said quietly. Like helping someone who needs it. Even if it's scary or complicated. Jack stared at her across the table. This young woman who had appeared in his life like an answered prayer he'd been too proud to voice. She was right, of course. He'd spent 30 years running from his mistakes, instead of trying to make amends for them. But here was a chance, maybe his last chance, to prove that he was capable of being the man he should have been all along. Emily, he said, his voice steady with newfound resolve. And I promise you this, whatever happens, wherever this road takes us, I won't abandon you, not like I did them. Emily smiled through her tears. And for the first time since she'd found out about the pregnancy, she felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Outside, the neon signs of the truck stop painted the desert night in electric colors, and somewhere in the distance, a freight train's whistle echoed across the vast emptiness, a sound full of movement and possibility, of journeys just beginning. Chapter 4. Unexpected Encounters. The motel room was clean but sparse. 2 double beds separated by a nightstand, a small television mounted on the wall, and a window that looked out over the parking lot filled with 18-wheelers. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, still clutching the small bag that contained her few possessions. Including the pregnancy test that had started this entire journey, Jack had insisted on paying for the room, despite her protests. He'd also bought her a few basic necessities from the truck stop convenience store, a toothbrush, some soap, a change of clothes that was close enough to her size. The kindness of it all overwhelmed her in a way that made her chest tight with emotion. You should get some rest, Jack said, settling into the chair by the window. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next move. You don't have to stay, Emily said softly. I mean, if you want to sleep in your truck or... I'm not going anywhere, Jack said firmly. I told you I wouldn't abandon you, and I meant it. Emily nodded, grateful beyond words. She changed into the oversized t-shirt Jack had bought her and settled under the covers. But sleep eluded her. Her mind raced with thoughts of the baby growing inside her, of the father who had disappeared when she needed him most, of the uncertain future that stretched ahead. From across the room, she could hear Jack shifting restlessly in his chair. Neither of them was sleeping well. "Jack," she whispered into the darkness. "Yeah, tell me about Emma, if you want to, I mean." There was a long pause before Jack spoke. "The last time I saw her, she was riding a bicycle in front of her house, pink with streamers on the handlebars. She was laughing at something her stepfather said, and she looked so," his voice cracked, "she looked so happy, so complete, like she'd never needed anything I could have given her." "But you don't know that," Emily said gently. "Every child needs their father, even if they have a good stepfather too." "Maybe," Jack said, "but by then, showing up would have been more about me than about her. I'd missed all the important moments. First steps, first words, first day of school. What right did I have to disrupt her life just to make myself feel better?" Emily was quiet for a moment, processing his words. "My father left when I was 3, she said finally. "I used to make up stories about him, that he was a soldier overseas, or a scientist on a secret mission, or that he was planning some grand gesture to come back for me. It took me years to accept that he just didn't want to be a father." "I'm sorry," Jack said, and she could hear the genuine remorse in his voice. "The thing is," Emily continued, "I would have rather known the truth than lived with the fantasies, even if the truth hurt. At least then, I could have stopped waiting for someone who was never coming back." Jack absorbed this, understanding the implication. Had Emma spent years wondering about him? Had she created her own fantasies about the father who'd never appeared? Morning came too soon, announced by the rumble of diesel engines starting up in the parking lot. Jack had finally dozed off in his chair sometime before dawn, and Emily had managed a few hours of restless sleep. They gathered their few belongings and prepared to continue their journey east. The truck stop diner was busier in the morning, filled with drivers grabbing coffee and breakfast before hitting the road. Jack and Emily found a booth near the back, and Emily noticed how Jack's eyes constantly scanned the room, an old habit, she realized, of someone always looking for a way out. They were halfway through their breakfast when Emily heard a familiar voice calling Jack's name from across the diner. "Jack Morrison? Well, I'll be damned." Emily looked up to see a burly man with graying hair and a weathered face approaching their table. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, and his broad smile suggested he and Jack went way back. "Tommy Rodriguez," Jack said, standing to clasp the man's hand. "What are you doing in this neck of the woods?" "Could ask you the same thing," Tommy replied, his eyes shifting curiously to Emily. "Been running loads between Dallas and Phoenix. You?" "El Paso and beyond," Jack said carefully. "Tommy, this is Emily. She's traveling with me for a while." Tommy's eyebrows rose slightly, but he extended his hand to Emily with genuine warmth. "Pleasure to meet you, Emily. Any friend of Jack's is a friend of mine." Emily shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of years of manual labor, the same as Jack's. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" Tommy asked, already sliding into the booth next to Jack. "Haven't seen you in, 5 years? Maybe more." "Something like that," Jack said, and Emily caught the tension in his voice. "Man, you look good," Tommy continued, oblivious to Jack's discomfort. "Better than the last time I saw you. Remember that night in Tucson? You were pretty torn up about that whole situation with Sarah." Emily felt her stomach drop. She saw Jack's face go pale, his eyes darting to her and then back to Tommy. "Tommy," Jack said quietly, "maybe we shouldn't—" "Oh, right," Tommy said, misunderstanding Jack's concern. "Ancient history, right? Besides, things worked out for Sarah in the end. She married that teacher, what was his name? Michael something. They moved to Colorado, I think. Or was it Utah?" Emily watched Jack's face carefully, seeing the pain there mixed with something else. Relief, perhaps, that Sarah had found happiness. Her daughter turned out real well too, Tommy continued, warming to his subject. Emma, right? I ran into Sarah at a truck stop in Denver about 3 years ago. Emma was with her. Must have been 21, 22 by then. Gorgeous kid, looked just like her mother. Sarah said she was in college, studying to be a teacher like her stepfather. Emily felt the air leave her lungs. 21 or 22, the same age as her, and studying to be a teacher. Emily had been studying education before her grandmother passed away, and her world fell apart. She was real proud, Tommy went on. Oblivious to the bombshell he'd just dropped, said Emma was getting married that summer to some nice boy from her college. They were planning a small wedding in the mountains. Jack had gone completely still, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Emily could see his hands shaking slightly. Married, Jack repeated quietly. Yeah, can you believe it? Makes you feel old, doesn't it? Kids you remember as babies, getting married and starting families of their own. Tommy chuckled and slapped Jack on the shoulder. Anyway, I should let you folks finish your breakfast. Good seeing you again, Jack. And nice meeting you, Emily. After Tommy left, the silence at their table was deafening. Emily stared at Jack, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. The timing was too perfect, too coincidental. 21 years old, the right age. Studying education. The way the waitress had said Emily looked familiar. Jack, she said slowly, her voice barely audible above the diner noise. What was Sarah's last name? Jack looked at her with haunted eyes. Miller. Sarah Miller. Emily's hands began to tremble. She reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet, extracting her driver's license with shaking fingers. She slid it across the table to Jack. He picked it up and read the name. Emily Rose Miller. The driver's license slipped from Jack's fingers and clattered onto the table. He stared at Emily as if seeing her for the first time, noting features he should have recognized sooner. The shape of her eyes, the stubborn set of her chin, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. Oh my God, he whispered. Emily felt tears streaming down her cheeks. You're him, she said. You're my father. The diner seemed to fade away around them, the morning bustle becoming white noise. Jack reached across the table with a trembling hand and touched Emily's face, as if confirming she was real. Emma, he said, using her middle name, the name he'd given her, the name her mother had kept but never used. My little Emma. And in that moment, 21 years of questions, fantasies, and abandonment collided with the impossible reality that the father she'd stopped waiting for had been the one to save her on a lonely stretch of desert highway, just when she needed him most. Chapter 5. The Weight of Truth. The revelation hung between them like a thundercloud ready to burst. Emma, stared at the man who had been a stranger 24 hours ago and was now revealed to be the father she had spent her entire life wondering about. Jack sat frozen, his weathered hands still trembling as he tried to process the impossible coincidence that had brought them together. I need some air, Emily whispered, sliding out of the booth on unsteady legs. Jack started to follow her, but she held up a hand. Please, just give me a minute. He watched helplessly as she walked out of the diner, his heart breaking with each step she took away from him. Around them, the morning bustle continued, truckers finishing their coffee, waitresses refilling cups, the world moving forward as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and Jack felt the weight of 21 years of absence crushing down on him. Outside, Emily leaned against the side of the building, gulping the desert air as if she were drowning. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, emotions, and questions. The father she had imagined in countless childhood fantasies was nothing like the man sitting inside. He was both better and worse than anything she had dreamed up. Better because he had stopped for her, had shown her kindness without knowing who she was, had promised not to abandon her. Worse, because she now understood that his absence from her life had been a choice, not a circumstance beyond his control. She thought about her mother, Sarah, who had never spoken ill of Jack, despite having every right to. Sarah had simply said that some people weren't ready to be parents, and that it was better to have one parent who wanted you than two parents where one didn't. Emily had always wondered if her mother was protecting her feelings or protecting Jack's memory. Now she knew it had been both. After several minutes, Jack appeared beside her, keeping a respectful distance but close enough that she could feel his presence. They stood in silence, watching the trucks come and go from the fuel pumps, each lost in their own thoughts. "Your grandmother," Jack said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Rose. That was Sarah's mother, wasn't it?" Emily nodded without looking at him. "She moved in with us when I was 5. Mum was working 2 jobs to support us, and Grandma Rose said family should stick together." She paused, then added quietly, "She never mentioned you." "Not once." Jack absorbed this blow without flinching. "She had every right to hate me." "She didn't hate you," Emily said, surprising him. "I found some letters once, when I was helping clean out her things after she passed. Love letters between her and my grandfather. But there were others too. One was from my mom, written right after I was born. She told Grandma Rose that she hoped someday you would find your way back to us, but that she wasn't going to wait for you to grow up." The words hit Jack like physical blows. "She waited for me." "For a while," Emily said softly. "According to the letter, she kept expecting you to call or show up. She even kept your name on the birth certificate, hoping—" Emily's voice broke. "Hoping you would want to be part of my life." Jack closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had thrown away. "I was so scared," he whispered. "Under 22 years old and convinced I would ruin everything I touched, I thought leaving was the noble thing to do." "And later," Emily asked, finally turning to look at him, "when you weren't 22 anymore, when you had time to think about it?" Jack met her eyes, seeing his own pain reflected back at him. "Later, I was too ashamed, too convinced that you were better off without me. When I finally tracked you down, you had Michael. You had a father who was actually there for you." "Michael is a good man," Emily agreed. "He taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation. He loved me like his own daughter." Jack nodded, grateful despite the pain. "I'm glad. You deserved that. But he wasn't you," Emily said simply. "And no matter how wonderful he was, there was always this emptiness. This question mark where you should have been." They stood in silence again, the desert wind picking up and sending dust devils dancing across the parking lot. Emily thought about the pregnancy test in her bag, about the baby growing inside her who would face the same questions she had faced if the father continued to refuse her calls. "The baby's father," Jack said, as if reading her thoughts. "He knows about the pregnancy." Emily's laugh was bitter. "Oh, he knows. He also knows he wants nothing to do with it, or me." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Funny how history repeats itself, isn't it?" Jack felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "Emily, I'm so sorry for all of it, for leaving your mother, for not being there for you, for the example I set that makes you think all men are cowards." "Are they?" she asked, her voice small and vulnerable. "Are all men cowards?" "No," Jack said firmly. "Some of us are. Some of us run when things get scary or complicated, but not all of us. Michael didn't run. There are good men out there, Emily. Men who stay and fight and choose love over fear. But not you," she said, and the words weren't accusatory, just sad. "No," Jack admitted, "not me. I was a coward. I ran from the best thing that ever happened to me, and I've spent 21 years paying for it." Emily studied his face, seeing the genuine remorse there. The deep lines carved by years of regret. Why didn't you try to contact me directly? I'm an adult. I could have made my own choice about whether to have a relationship with you." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was afraid you would reject me, and I thought I deserved that rejection. It felt like justice. I abandoned you, so you should abandon me." "That's not justice," Emily said. "That's just more abandonment. More running away." The truth of her words settled over Jack like a heavy blanket. She was right, of course. He had spent decades running from his mistakes instead of trying to make amends. And in doing so, he had robbed both of them of the chance to know each other. "I know I don't have the right to ask," Jack said carefully, "but is there any chance? Could we try to start over? I know I can't be the father you needed when you were growing up, but maybe I could be something else. Maybe I could be the father you need now." Emily looked at him for a long moment, this stranger who was her father, this man who had saved her without knowing who she was. She thought about the kindness he had shown her, the gentleness in his voice when he read from the prayer book, the way he had promised not to abandon her. "I don't know," she said honestly. "This is all so overwhelming. Yesterday I thought I was completely alone in the world, and now I find out that the man who stopped to help me is my father. It feels like something out of a movie." "I know it's a lot," Jack said, "and I don't expect you to forgive me or to want me in your life just because we've found each other. But Emily, please don't think you're alone. You're not alone anymore." Emily felt tears starting again. But this time they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of possibility, of hope she hadn't dared to feel in months. "What happens now?" she asked. Jack looked out at the highway, the endless ribbon of asphalt that had been his home for so many years. "Now we keep going. We figure it out as we go. We learn how to be father and daughter, even if we're starting 21 years late." Emily nodded slowly. "And the baby. The baby will have a grandfather," Jack said without hesitation. "A grandfather who won't run away, who won't abandon them the way I abandoned you." "That's a promise." For the first time since the revelation, Emily smiled through her tears. It wasn't a complete solution to all their problems, but it was a beginning. It was hope. "Come on," Jack said, gesturing toward the truck. "We have a lot of road ahead of us, and a lot of talking to do." As they walked back to the 18-wheeler that had brought them together, Emily realized that sometimes the road you think is taking you away from everything you need is actually leading you exactly where you're supposed to be. Chapter 6. Healing Roads. The hours that followed their revelation passed in a strange mixture of awkward silence and tentative conversation. Emily sat in the passenger seat, stealing glances at Jack as he navigated the highway through New Mexico, trying to reconcile the father she had imagined with the man beside her. Jack, meanwhile, found himself studying her profile whenever traffic allowed, searching for traces of himself and Sarah in the young woman who carried his blood. "Tell me about your childhood," Jack said as they passed a road sign indicating they were still 300 miles from El Paso. "The parts that matter. The parts I should have been there for." Emily considered where to begin. How do you summarize 21 years of life to the person who should have lived them alongside you? "I was a quiet kid," she said finally. "Loved to read, loved school. Mom used to joke that I was born serious." She smiled at the memory. "Grandma Rose would take me to the library every Saturday. We'd check out a stack of books as tall as I was. And I'd read them all before the next week." Jack felt a pang of loss, so sharp it was almost physical. He had missed her first steps, her first words, her first day of school, but he had also missed the everyday moments, the Saturday library trips, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees that needed kissing better. "What did you want to be when you grew up?" he asked. "A teacher, like Michael," Emily said, "but also like Grandma Rose. She taught Sunday school for 40 years, and the kids adored her. She had this way of making everyone feel important, like their thoughts and feelings mattered." Emily's voice grew soft. I wanted to be like that for someone else's children, since I figured I'd never have any of my own. Why did you think that? Emily shrugged, a gesture that reminded Jack painfully of Sarah. I don't know. Maybe because I grew up seeing how hard it was for Mum to raise me alone. Maybe because I was afraid of ending up like her, pregnant and abandoned. Turns out I was right to be afraid. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter. Emily, what happened with the baby's father? That's not your fault, and it doesn't mean you're destined to repeat your mother's life. Doesn't it? Emily asked, turning to look at him directly. I fell for someone who wasn't ready for commitment, just like she did. I believed him when he said he loved me, just like she did, and when things got complicated, he disappeared, just like you did. The comparison stung because it was accurate. Jack had no defense against the truth. What was his name? Jack asked quietly. David, Emily said. David Chen. We met in college. He was studying business. I was in education. We dated for 2 years. He talked about the future like we'd be part of each other's. And then, she trailed off, staring out at the desert landscape. And then you told him about the baby. And then everything changed, Emily confirmed. Suddenly, all those future plans didn't include me anymore. He said we were too young, that he had career goals, that a baby would ruin everything he'd worked for. When I told him I was keeping it, he said that was my choice, but it wouldn't be his problem. Jack felt a surge of anger toward this young man he'd never met, followed immediately by a crushing sense of self-awareness. How was David's reaction any different from his own? Had been 21 years ago. I'm sorry, Jack said. You deserved better. Yes, I did, Emily agreed, and there was strength in her voice that hadn't been there before. And so did my mother. And so did you, actually. Jack glanced at her in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, you deserve to have someone tell you that being scared doesn't make you a bad person, Emily said. You deserve to have someone help you understand that running away from responsibility isn't the same as protecting people from yourself. You were 22, Jack, barely older than I am now. Maybe if someone had helped you see that you could learn to be a good father instead of assuming you'd be a bad one, things would have been different. Jack had never considered this perspective. He had spent so many years condemning himself for his cowardice that he had never thought about the circumstances that had led to it. His own youth, his lack of role models, the absence of anyone to guide him toward a better choice. My father left too, Jack said suddenly, the words coming out before he could stop them. When I was 15, just packed up one day and never came back. Maybe that's why I thought leaving was normal. Maybe I didn't know how to stay because no one ever showed me how. Emily turned to study his profile. What happened to him? I don't know, Jack admitted. I never tried to find him, told myself I didn't care. But the truth is, I was afraid he wouldn't want to be found, just like I was afraid you wouldn't want to find me. Fear, Emily said softly. It's like a disease, isn't it? It passes from one generation to the next if you're not careful. Yeah, Jack agreed. It is. They were quiet for a while, both lost in thought. The landscape had begun to change as they traveled further east. The flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and mesquite. The afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, warm and golden. Jack, Emily said eventually, can I ask you something that might be hard to answer? Shoot. Do you think you would have been a good father if you had stayed? I mean, if you had tried? Jack considered the question carefully. It was something he had wondered about for decades but had never allowed himself to explore fully. I think I would have tried, he said finally. And I think trying would have made me better than I was. Maybe not perfect, maybe not even good at first, but better. The thing about being a parent is that you learn by doing it. You don't start out knowing how. You figure it out as you go. Michael told me that once, Emily said. He said the day he married Mom, He didn't know anything about being a father to a 5-year-old girl, but he said love makes you brave enough to learn. Michael sounds like a wise man. He is, Emily agreed. But he also said that the hardest part about being a parent isn't the sleepless nights or the teenage attitude or the college tuition. It's learning to let your children make their own mistakes while still being there to catch them when they fall. Jack absorbed this wisdom, thinking about all the times he could have been there to catch Emily when she fell, all the mistakes he could have helped her avoid or learn from. "I missed so much," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Yes, you did," Emily said, but her tone wasn't cruel. "But I'm not 5 years old anymore, Jack. I'm not 15 or 18 or even 21. I'm a grown woman who's about to become a mother herself. Maybe this is exactly when I need a father most, not to protect me from making mistakes, but to help me clean up the mess when I do." Jack felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the tight band of guilt and regret that had constricted his breathing for so many years. Emily was offering him something he had never dared to hope for: forgiveness. But more than that, she was offering him a chance to be useful, to be needed, to be the father she required now, rather than mourning the father he had failed to be then. "What do you need from me?" he asked simply. Emily smiled. And for the first time since he had met her on that lonely stretch of highway, she looked truly young, hopeful and bright, and ready to face whatever came next. "Help me figure out how to be a good mother," she said. "Help me understand that being scared doesn't mean I'm not capable. Help me believe that love really can make you brave enough to learn." "I can do that," Jack said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jack realized that the road ahead looked different than it had that morning. It was still uncertain, still full of challenges and unknowns, but it was no longer a path he would travel alone. For the first time in 21 years, Jack Morrison was going home, not to a place, but to the family he had never stopped loving, even when he was too afraid to claim them. Chapter 7. New Beginnings. 6 months later, the small apartment in Austin, Texas, buzzed with the kind of chaos that only comes with preparing for a new life. Baby clothes hung on a makeshift clothesline strung across the living room. Boxes of diapers were stacked in corners, and the sweet scent of vanilla candles mixed with the aroma of Jack's homemade chili simmering on the stove. Emily sat in the rocking chair Jack had surprised her with the week before, a beautiful wooden piece he'd found at an antique shop and refinished himself. Her hands rested on her rounded belly, now prominently displaying the 7-month mark of her pregnancy. She watched Jack move around the small kitchen with an ease that still amazed her. This man, who had once lived entirely on truck-stop food, now carefully seasoning vegetables and taste-testing sauces. "You know," Emily said, smiling as Jack fussed over the cornbread in the oven, "I never imagined my father would be the one nesting for my baby." Jack looked up from where he was wiping down counters that were already clean, a slight blush coloring his weathered cheeks. "I may have missed out on preparing for your arrival, but I'll be damned if I'm going to miss preparing for this little one's." The transformation in both of them over the past 6 months had been remarkable. Jack had sold his truck and used the money to put a down payment on a small house just outside Austin, close enough to Emily's apartment to be helpful, far enough away to give her independence. He'd found work at a local shipping company, a desk job that kept him home every night and gave him weekends free to help Emily prepare for motherhood. Emily had enrolled in online classes to finish her education degree, determined to build a stable career before the baby arrived. The insurance from her grandmother's house had provided enough money for them to get by, while they both adjusted to their new lives. And slowly, carefully, they had built something that felt like family. "What have you heard from David at all?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. It was a question he asked every few weeks, not because he expected a different response, but because he wanted Emily to know she could talk about it if she needed to. "No," Emily said, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. "And I don't expect to. I think I've finally accepted that some people just aren't meant to be parents. No matter how old they are or how ready they think they should be." Jack paused in his kitchen activities, hearing the peace in her voice. It had taken months for Emily to reach this level of acceptance. Months of long conversations, tears, and gradual healing. There had been difficult days when the weight of raising a child alone had seemed overwhelming, and darker moments when she wondered if she was repeating her mother's mistakes. But there had also been moments of joy, feeling the baby's first kicks while Jack's hand rested beside hers on her belly, shopping for cribs and car seats with someone who cared as much as she did about getting everything right, having someone to call at 3 in the morning when pregnancy insomnia kept her awake and anxious. "Sarah called today," Jack said casually, though there was nothing casual about the significance of that statement. Emily looked up in surprise. It had taken 4 months for Jack to work up the courage to contact Sarah, and another month before she had been willing to speak with him. Their first conversation had been painful for everyone involved, years of hurt and misunderstanding to work through, but gradually they had found a way to communicate that honored their shared history without reopening old wounds. "What did she say?" "She wants to come for the birth," Jack said, his voice carefully neutral. "She said she missed being there when you came into the world, and she doesn't want to miss her grandchild's arrival." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. The relationship with her mother had been complicated by Jack's return to their lives. Sarah had been protective, suspicious, and deeply concerned about Emily getting hurt again. But slowly, as she saw the changes in both Jack and Emily, Sarah had begun to soften. "And Michael?" Emily asked. Jack's smile was genuine now. "He wants to bring his toolbox, says every baby needs a grandfather who can fix things around the house." Emily laughed through her tears. Michael had been the biggest surprise in all of this. Instead of feeling threatened by Jack's presence, he had embraced the idea of Emily having more people to love and support her. "The more family this baby has, the better," he had told Jack during their first awkward phone conversation. Lord knows we all could have used more help when Emily was little." A sudden movement in her belly made Emily gasp, her hand flying to her side. Jack was beside her in an instant, his face filled with concern. "Just a strong kick," Emily assured him, taking his hand and placing it where she'd felt the movement. "I think someone's excited about having so many grandparents." Jack's eyes filled with wonder as he felt his grandchild move beneath his palm. It was a sensation he'd never experienced, had never even dreamed he might experience. When Emily had first told him she was keeping the baby, he'd been supportive but abstract about it. Now, feeling this tiny person who carried his blood, who would call him Grandpa, the reality of it overwhelmed him. "Have you decided on names yet?" he asked softly. Emily had been considering this question for weeks. She'd made lists, read baby name books, asked for suggestions from everyone she knew, but in the end, the choice had become clear. "If it's a girl," she said, "I want to name her Rose, after Grandma." Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. She would have loved that. "And if it's a boy," Emily continued, watching Jack's face carefully, "I want to name him Jackson, after his grandfather." Jack's breath caught. He stared at Emily, overwhelmed by the gift she was offering him, not just the honor of having his grandchild carry his name, but the forgiveness and acceptance that gesture represented. "Emily," he whispered, "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll be there," she said simply. "Say you'll teach him to fish and drive and be a good man. Say you'll tell him stories about the road and show him how to fix things with his hands. Say you'll be the grandfather I always wished I'd had a grandfather to be." "I promise," Jack said, his voice breaking with the weight of the vow. I promise I'll be there for everything, every birthday, every scraped knee, every school play, every graduation. I promise I won't run away again." As if responding to the emotion in his voice, the baby kicked again, stronger this time. Emily and Jack both laughed, the sound filling the small apartment with joy and hope. "I think that's approval," Emily said, wiping tears from her cheeks. Jack looked around the apartment, at the baby clothes and the boxes of supplies, at the ultrasound pictures taped to the refrigerator, at the woman who had become the daughter he'd always loved but had been too afraid to claim. 6 months ago, he'd been a lonely man driving endless highways, running from a past he thought he could never repair. Now, he was a father preparing to become a grandfather. Surrounded by family he'd thought he'd lost forever. "You know," he said, settling into the chair beside Emily's rocker, "I spent 30 years thinking the road was about moving away from things. Turns out, sometimes it's about moving toward them." Emily reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that would have seemed impossible on that day in the desert when they were strangers bound together by circumstance. "Sometimes," she agreed, "the road brings you exactly where you need to be." Outside, the Texas sun was setting, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and pink that had colored their first evening together as father and daughter. But this time, they weren't traveling toward an uncertain future. They were already home, surrounded by love and second chances and the promise of new life. And in a few months, when little Rose or Jackson made their entrance into the world, they would be welcomed by a family that had been broken but was now whole. A family that had learned that love really could make you brave enough to stay, to fight, to choose hope over fear. The road had brought them together, but love would keep them that way. Fim de Historia. Dear viewers, we hope that Jack and Emily's story has touched your hearts as much as it touched ours. This tale of second chances, forgiveness, and the power of family reminds us that it's never too late to choose love over fear, to build bridges instead of walls, and to believe that the road ahead can lead us to exactly where we belong. If this story moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us what city you're watching from and share your thoughts about Jack and Emily's incredible journey. Have you ever experienced a moment when life surprised you with an unexpected gift? Have you found your own second chances on the roads you've traveled? Every day, we bring you stories that explore the beautiful complexity of human relationships, the power of redemption, and the magic that can happen when strangers become family. Don't miss our upcoming stories. We have amazing tales waiting to unfold that will take you on emotional journeys you'll never forget. Thank you for joining us on this road to healing and hope. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most important destinations are the ones we never planned to reach. See you in the comments.